My job was to sit there and not look at him while he worked.
Gonzo, the Coast Guard years. Key West, Episode 9, Firewatch and Tobacco.
It shouldn't come as any shock to any of you that my recollection regarding the order of some of these events is a bit off, so to speak. Nothing else. It's an indicator just how long ago all this really was. So in addition to shipyards looking like a mess most of the time, one of the things that was also a constant presence were the shipyard workers. They all wore hard hats, and we had to wear hard hats too when we were running about outside the interior of the ship. The hard hats and the clothes that the shipyard workers wore also served as a way to determine what their jobs were. Not in all cases, it wasn't always so simple, but particularly though, there was one group that you could almost always tell what their job was by what they wore. And I'm talking about the welders. Now, the welders were kind of a special sort of group. They wore special welder jackets, and they always seemed to be the most focused people. I mean, by focus, they pretty much ignored everybody if you weren't a welder. So I think it was kind of a big deal to be a welder in the shipyards. Anyway, so I got to work with some of the welders, and by work, that's really not what I did. But the job that I had apparently was a really important sort of role during this whole shipbuilding stuff. So to date, you've heard me whine and complain about not doing seaman ship shit. I mean, that is still a tongue twister, and I must have said that 1,000 times in previous episodes. So one day, after taking the Wild Wild West bus from the barracks down to the shipyard, and after morning muster, the BM3 or the BM2, I remember which one, came up to me to let me know what my fun duties of the day were going to be. So I followed one of those dudes through the ship, and the ship was kind of a mess too at this point. And pretty much the first part of my Coast Guard career, I really wasn't paying too much attention to where I was going. I was more interested in being able to put one foot in front of the other. Now you're thinking, well, why is that such a big deal? One foot in front of the other. You've been able to do that since you could walk. Well, you're thinking that, but I'm sure you're thinking that because you never got to wear boondockers. Boondockers essentially are these big black steel-toed boots. And if you change the soles of the boots out, they would be a totally different kind of shoe. If you put Doc Marten soles on them, or those Goodyear sort of soles on them, and you wore them with a pair of jeans and you rolled them up a little bit, the jeans that is, throw on a flannel shirt, you'd look like something from the grunge industry, or you'd look like you were in a grunge rock band, which is totally cool because I'm a huge grunge fan today, music that is. So it's cool. I like it. It would have been a good look for me. But anyway, I hated wearing boondockers. They were a real pain in the ass. For those of you who don't know, grunge music is something that started in the late 80s and went through the early mid-90s. Ask your parents if you were born after the late 80s or early 90s. You probably have no idea what grunge music is, but you should totally go check it out. So boondockers, to say the least, took a while to learn to walk in. I wore them a lot in boot camp, but not on a ship. And on a ship, the decks, the surfaces you walked on were a lot different. And I think I mentioned that in a previous video podcast. Wow. Anyway, no, I don't do video. So I don't think most people have ever worn these before. As a matter of fact, I think boondockers at this point were the only kind of boots I had ever worn. I mean, even as a kid, I didn't have snow boots, which is a whole other different story. And it's not went to school uphill both ways with no shoes or anything like that. Just, I don't think I ever had snow boots as a kid. It didn't snow a lot either where I was, so it's probably one of the reasons why. But anyway, One of the interesting things on a Coast Guard ship while you're wearing boondockers is being able to go down a ladder. Now, a ladder in the Coast Guard is essentially stairs. They're not fun stairs, and they're not an actual ladder or anything like that, but they are really, really fucking steep. Each step on a Coast Guard ladder was made out of metal, and it felt like they're about half the size or half the width of a regular old step. They might have been bigger than your standard, 2x4. And they had these crazy, metal spikes on them. They're supposed to be non-slip. And let me tell you, they hurt like a motherfucker if you skinned your leg on them. And trust me, everyone did, at least at one point or another. I mean, I'm sure I banged into it several times. And you did that mostly when you're in a hurry, you're trying to get from point A to point B on the ship, and you're hauling ass. And then when the seas are really bad and the ship is rocking, I mean, it was going to happen. And sometimes when you were in port and trying to go down a ladder, when you came back from Liberty, you're just drunk as hell. And, one little whoopsie, I mean, you definitely had a bigger chance of falling up the ladder and skinning your shin or your legs or your knee. You did going down, but going down was no fun either because, and that's a whole different story. Most of the times, though, as you sort of got used to the ladders, then you started doing really crazy things. Like you almost find yourself running down the ladder. They had these metal rails on both sides, and it's almost like the movies. I'm sure you've seen some movies where guys were sliding down these ladders. That actually happens. People actually do that. And that is so cool the first time you actually do it, because you kind of do it and don't think about it. It just whoosh, you go flying down these ladders and it's badass. Except for sometimes, though, you try to slide down the ladder and your hand inadvertently grips a little too tight onto it. And it's kind of weird because then you turn sideways at the wrong time. Anyway, okay, it's kind of a mess, and I can keep babbling on. But trying to slide down the ladder with your hands in really bad seas is a good way for you to completely lose control, and you end up slamming into the bulkhead in front of you or on the side. Okay, anyway, so I'm sorry. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. But it's really cool. Trust me on this one. Anyway, so by the time I actually got to where I was going, I think I ended up in what would eventually become the ship's admin office. The admin office is where the storekeepers, the yeoman, and the warrant officer in charge of the support personnel hung out. The support group also included the ship's cooks as well, so I don't want to forget them. The overall mission, I believe, of the support group was to basically take care of all the needs of everyone else on the ship. I mean, I think that was their main mission. And there's a whole lot of stuff that they did, I think, that just never got the recognition it deserved. It clearly was not the most glamorous job, but we couldn't have done a damn thing without the support team. So into the ship's admin office I went with the BM2 or BM3, whichever one it was. But I kind of feel like it was the BM2. But yeah, this is a long time ago. So he brings me up to one of these shipyard workers, and he was one of those guys wearing a really big, thick-ass jacket, and it kind of looked like he was wearing it on backwards, but that's just some memory I have, and that might be wrong. And he also had on this little weird cap on his head. It looked a little bit more like a do-rag, and he also happened to have on his head a welder's mask. Ding, 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 ding. He was a welder. Go figure. So my job, working with the welder, my job was to sit there and not look at him while he worked. Yeah, okay, I know. That seems pretty easy, but I'm like, okay, so what am I supposed to be doing? And my boss is like, see this guy? Yeah, just ignore him. I'm like, okay, so why am I here? I wasn't there to actually watch this dude I was there as a fire watch. I'm like, okay, so what's going to happen? This dude is going to like spontaneously fucking combust or something? What are you talking about? So, okay, so that wasn't really the idea. It was as this dude was welding, just in case he started a fire. So they sort of pointed me in the direction of the fire extinguisher that was sitting on the floor. By the way, I had no fucking idea how to use this fire extinguisher. I assume when you read the direction, like you pull the pin and you point it, and they sort of told you how to use it in boot camp, but not really. We didn't actually use one. It was like a demo thing or something. Anyway, they give me this fire extinguisher that I really didn't know what the fuck I was doing. The bosun's mate told me that when this guy is done, I need to hang out for 30 minutes after he's done, just in case a fire spontaneously starts. So the welder got to work, and, I'm not going to kid you. They tell you you're not supposed to look at the actual arc of where during the welding process, because without, a welder's mask or goggles, because, I don't know, maybe your eyes will fucking, combust and blow up, or you'll burn your eyes out. I don't know. But of course, you know what I did? I looked. Of course I looked. But not very long. I took like little quick sneak peeks. Every time I did, when I turned away, I would see spots. So, yeah, it was probably not a good idea. But when you're 19-ish or whatever, you're not the brightest thing in the world. But for the entire time, I kept taking sneak peeks, and I found myself getting pretty bored. So the welder didn't take all that long. And so I don't know, but he was done welding, and he sort of looked at me and he said, "All right, cool. Later, man." And then so the 30-minute post-welding fire watch portion started. The best part about this was I didn't have a watch. I was sitting on an empty 5-gallon bucket with a fire extinguisher close by, literally hoping nothing would happen, but wondering how long was I actually going to stay here? I didn't have a watch. I had no idea what I was going to be doing. I don't remember how long I was there, but eventually one of the bosun's mates came by and told me that I was done and then I can go and do something else. I later met up with the same welder, I think like the next day or, sometime that same week or something like that. But we are in a totally different part of the ship. I don't remember where in the ship it was. I just remember I saw this guy and, got to fire watch with him more than once. As I had mentioned before, we were staying at the Navy barracks, and I feel like I remember the Navy barracks were pretty far away from everything else. So unless you had a car, you spent all of your time at the barracks and maybe at the mess hall getting some food. I remember that the barracks kind of resembled a college dorm, more or less. All the rooms had 2 single beds in them, I believe, and a small desk, and of course a window. There was really nothing special about these at all. The walls were like an off-white color, entirely made of cinder block. You kind of feel like you were in a prison. Clearly we didn't have bars on our windows or doors, but our walls were made out of cinder block. I was starting to meet a few of the folks from the ship and being a little bit less of a recluse myself. One of the guys I got to know, his name was Dan. No, it's not his real name, but we're going to call him Dan. Dan was one of the seamen, seamen, who was previously on the cutter Lipan that was in Key West. And when they decommissioned the Lipan, he got transferred to the Thetis. So he went from a 205-foot ship to a 270-foot ship. This dude was absolutely hysterical. He was a hoot. I remember always sort of not quite getting in trouble with him. We always managed to dodge getting into trouble. But the things that we did do, we probably should have gotten into a lot of trouble for. He could sweet talk his way out of anything. He was just awesome to hang around. And then there was also this guy named Jackson. So Jackson and Dan were like rarely ever apart. They were always together, which is really weird because like Jackson was a little more mellow and tranquilo, And Dan was a little more hyper, but he was super fun. Both are pretty cool. I don't know how I ended up in Dan's room. I think maybe Dan and Jackson were actually roommates when they were there. Both Dan and Jackson had been in the Coast Guard longer than me. I mean, clearly everyone had been in the Coast Guard longer than me at this point, except for maybe a few of the brand new boots that joined the ship after I did. There was only a few of those. So from my point of view, they knew like a shit ton more than I did because, they were like 20 or 21. Again, I think I was only 19 at this point. I think I was 19. The three of us were in Dan's room, and I don't know if any of you recall what this is, but he had a boombox. Basically, it's a big radio. I don't know if they even make those anymore, but he had a big boombox in his room, and it had a dual tape cassette, which was like a big deal back then. Well, not really. It was kind of normal. And if you don't know what a cassette tape is, go talk to your parents because go find your parents or your grandparents or something. They will tell you what a tape cassette is. Anyway, so I don't know how Dan even got it there because we all hopped on an airplane to get to Newport, Rhode Island. So maybe he brought on the airplane with him. I don't know. So we were sitting in Dan's room, and Dan had a mixtape. Again, I don't know if anyone actually makes mixtapes anymore. Clearly, you don't because you don't see a cassette tape anywhere. But essentially, a mixtape is nothing different than the playlist that you would get on some sort of digital music sort of subscription service thingy or whatever. On Dan's mixtape, we were like jamming out, and I'm pretty sure it was Duran Duran. And okay, look, shut up. You're wondering who the hell Duran Duran is. Again, go ask your parents or something like that. But believe me, Duran Duran was the shit back in the 80s. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure the song was Rio. So R-I-O or maybe Hungry Like the Wolf. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. If you've not heard of Duran Duran, these song titles mean nothing to you. So leave me alone. While we're there sitting there talking trash, Dan pulls out this pouch of chewing tobacco. And for some reason, I felt like it was a flavored chewing tobacco, like apple flavored or something like that. Now, before joining the Coast Guard, I used to work at this mom and pop grocery store in, the rural part of where I lived. And it was really super common to see like the male customers come in and purchase cigarettes, and others, would get some smokeless tobacco, like, chewing tobacco. But most of the guys bought their tobacco in like small cans. And I think it's called snuff or something like that. Anyway, but Dan had one of the pouches, not like the little round cans of tobacco. Now, I had never tried tobacco at this point, whether it is, a cigarette or chewing tobacco. But, Dan, offered the pouch to Jackson. And so Jackson took a big pinch of it, and it was tobacco. And, and then they just jammed it in their mouth. The first thing that came to mind was I remember that there used to be a bubble gum that came in a pouch too. And I think it was a bubble gum. I think it was like Big League Chew or something like that. And they would have these commercials with these actors who were pretending to be baseball players. And they were, taking huge wads of this bubble gum that was shredded up to kind of look like tobacco. And they jam it in their mouth, and it looked really cool. I mean, as a kid, I know I had tried that before. But yeah, this was not bubble gum. So, of course, Dan offers me some because, that's what, friends do, shipmates do. So I took a big old chunk and I jammed it in my mouth between my cheek and gum. And within seconds, my mouth started burning. My head started getting all dizzy. But that's okay because I'm like, yeah, this is great stuff. Of course, I didn't know that you're not supposed to swallow the spit. And, well, of course, I'm like swallowing that stuff. And then, my stomach started like doing flips and stuff. Like, what the hell are you doing, dude? And so, yeah, my head's spinning. I'm starting to feel sick, like seasick, and I'm not even on the damn ship. I'm sitting on somebody's bed, chewing on apple flavored tobacco. Of course, Rex is like looking all cool, like, hey, man, this is badass, man. Yeah. And Dan, of course, he's just chewing away like he'd been doing it all his life. So anyway, yeah. They probably saw my face turning green because at some point Dan said, "Hey man, just make sure you spit that stuff in the trash can and don't swallow it." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know that. No big deal." And of course, I know he knew I was full of shit, but he didn't call me out on it, which I really appreciate. Besides all that stuff, I mean, it was really cool that I was hanging out with these new dudes and listening to Duran Duran, and we might have been listening to them for a few minutes, might have been 3 freaking hours or something like that. But during all this time, the tobacco was making me sick. So, I mean, eventually I'd spit that stuff out. Of course, my cheek was still burning, and I don't know. But I can honestly say from that specific day till at least the time of this recording, I have never touched smokeless tobacco again. That stuff was, take that back. So there was one other time, but that's going to have to wait for a later episode. And I did not knowingly and willingly put chewing tobacco in my mouth. Yeah, I know what you're thinking, like, what? Anyway, one of the things about staying in the Navy barracks that I could never get used to, although it seemed like it was always the case no matter where I was in the Coast Guard for the next 4 years and change, was that I always had to share a bathroom with like a few dozen other people. Yeah, I'm not into sharing bathrooms. I mean, yeah, the mornings were always the worst. The bathroom, or the head as it was called, almost all the bathrooms were set up exactly the same way. All the Coast Guard bathrooms that I ever had to use. And this one Navy bathroom it's all the damn same. So when you walk in, there's like double doors that go into the bathroom, and immediately to your left of the double doors was like a line of like stalls, like toilet stalls. Oh my God. If you got there at the wrong time in the morning or after lunch, the place smelled like a fucking sewer. It was disgusting. I still don't know what these people were eating that made them smell so bad. Like, anyway, so every morning go in, I'm like, holy crap, here we go again. As you pass the stalls on the left, you go towards the back, there's like another sort of room built in within the room. That's where the showers were. And when you go in, fuck, man, it's they had like, shower heads, like 4 or 5 or whatever along, the walls. When you're taking a shower, there's like some other dude who's probably like 10 feet away from you, maybe a little closer, but in front of you. And this is one guy like 3 feet to your left or to your right, depending on which shower. But anyway, crap. I'm sitting there having to take showers basically with complete strangers. This is like my freaking boot camp nightmare all over again. I don't want to take showers with other people. I mean, yeah. Anyway, this is just never got used to that. And the boot camp was bad. It was worse in boot camp. And so when you eventually get, as you walk out of the shower, so sort of across the way from where the stalls were, there were 2 rows of sinks. And, there was one sink and then another sink like right on the opposite side of it. And there might have been like 4 or 5 of those. I don't remember. And they had mirrors in front. So they were separated by mirrors. I grew up with brothers and sisters, so I wasn't a stranger to sharing a bathroom so much. But these are my family members. But this time I'm sitting there, at one of these sinks, brushing my teeth with some dude like, shoulder to shoulder with me. And sometimes these guys would come right out of the shower. The only thing separating me from them was a towel that they had wrapped around their waist. And then, he's either shaving his face or he's blowing snot into the sink. And I'm like 19, and these guys are like in their 20s or late 20s or early 30s. So they're like old, gross ass men to me. And even make the shit worse, these dudes wanted to talk. I'm like, no, I don't want to talk to a complete stranger, especially one who's standing there half naked to me. I mean, isn't that something they warn you not to do? To stay clear of that shit?
You've been listening to Gonzo the Coast Guard Years Key West, written and produced by Tim Gonzalez, and I'm Nicholas Gonzalez, the voice guy. Join us next week for another episode of Gonzo the Coast Guard Years.